High-definition news for Tuesday morning, November 25th, 2014. I'm Jeff Kaufman.
The grand jury deliberated over 2 days, making their final decision.
In the matter of police officer Darren Wilson for the fatal shooting of 18-year-old Michael Brown in the St. Louis suburb of Ferguson on August 9th, the grand jury decides whether to indict. But authorities force the public to wait several hours to hear that decision. In that time, darkness falls and tensions rise. Finally, a community in which many feel the system is rigged receives the news it had feared since that day in August.
They determined that no probable cause exists to file any charge against Officer Wilson and returned a no true bill on each of the 5 indictments.
People in Ferguson pour into the streets to voice their outrage. Community leaders, state and local officials, and President Obama call on demonstrators to keep the peace.
I join Michael's parents in asking anyone who protests this decision to do so peacefully. I also appeal to the law enforcement officials in Ferguson and the region to show care and restraint in managing peaceful protests.
At first, peace does prevail, but it does not last.
This is reminiscent of what happened back in August, but this seems to be even more severe.
A wireless store just looted. I watched 20 people or so break in there, and then one young man threatened me for recording it.
This tear gas just dropped right near us. It's going to get very bad here if we don't have masks. They're throwing it back.
It was not what many in Ferguson, Missouri and across the nation wanted to hear last night, that Officer Wilson will face no charges for shooting Michael Brown, who was unarmed last August. But St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney Bill McCulloch insisted only the members of the grand jury have seen all the physical evidence in this case.
Physical evidence does not change because of public pressure or personal agenda. Physical evidence does not look away as events unfold, nor does it block out or add to memory. Physical evidence remains constant, and as such is a solid foundation upon which cases are built.
McCulloch insisted that witness statements often conflicted with the physical evidence and that some witnesses changed their testimony when confronted with that discrepancy. The prosecutor recounted the timeline of events that day, how Officer Wilson finished assisting a woman whose infant was having health issues, then got back in his squad car. He had already heard the descriptions of 2 young African-American men who'd shoplifted some cigarillos from a convenience store a couple of blocks away. Moments later, Wilson saw 2 young black men who fit the description of the shoplifters in the street ahead of him, Michael Brown and a friend.
As Wilson slowed or stopped as he reached Mr. Brown, he told them to move to the sidewalk. Words were exchanged, and they continued walking down the middle of the street. As they passed, Wilson observed that Michael Brown had cigarillos in his hand and was wearing a red hat and yellow socks. At approximately 12:02 p.m., Wilson radioed that he had 2 individuals on Canfield and needed assistance. Officer Wilson backed his vehicle at an angle, blocking their path and blocking the flow of traffic in both directions. An altercation took place at the car with Officer Wilson seated inside the vehicle and Mr. Brown standing at the driver's window. During the altercation, 2 shots were fired by Officer Wilson while still inside the vehicle. Mr. Brown ran east on Canfield, and Officer Wilson gave chase. Near the corner of Canfield and Copper Creek, Mr. Brown stopped and turned back towards Officer Wilson. Officer Wilson also stopped. As Michael Brown moved toward Officer Wilson, several more shots were fired by the officer, and Michael Brown was fatally wounded. Within seconds of the final shot, the assist car arrived. Less than 90 seconds passed between Officer Wilson's first contact with Michael Brown and his companion and the arrival of that assist car.
McCulloch released photos showing Wilson's injuries after the incident, swelling on his face, a scratch on the back of his neck, and this.
Mr. Brown's body was located approximately 153 feet east of Officer Wilson's car. Mr. Brown's blood was located approximately 25 feet farther east, past his body.
That indicates that Brown kept moving toward Wilson after he'd been shot. Wilson said his final shots were as Brown was less than 10 feet from him. Wilson will face no state charges. A federal investigation is still underway, and while that could lead to Wilson being charged with violating Brown's civil rights, most experts consider such an indictment unlikely. Brown's mother was distraught after the announcement. The family later issued a statement appealing for calm, but saying they are devastated. President Obama also appealed for peaceful protest and dialogue in a statement at the White House after the grand jury announcement, but he admitted there's plenty to talk about, and not just in Ferguson.
We need to recognize that the situation in Ferguson speaks to broader challenges that we still face as a nation. The fact is, in too many parts of this country, a deep distrust exists between law enforcement and communities of color. These are real issues, and we have to lift them up and not deny them or try to tamp them down. What we need to do is to understand them and figure out how do we make more progress, and that can be done. That won't be done by throwing bottles. That won't be done by smashing car windows. That won't be done by using this as an excuse to vandalize property, and it certainly won't be done by hurting anybody.
The protests in Ferguson began peacefully, but soon looters began breaking into businesses, including the convenience store where Michael Brown was captured on a security camera shoplifting. Some in the crowd began challenging police, who responded with tear gas, a lot of tear gas. As the evening wore on, most of the peaceful protesters gave up and left, leaving the streets to those committing violence, vandalism, looting, and arson. Ferguson police, assisted by law enforcement officers from St. Louis County, the Missouri State Police, and the National Guard, deployed in riot gear and slowly pushed the crowd out of the downtown area. CNN reporters Jason Carroll, Jake Tapper, Chris Cuomo, Don Lemon, and Stephanie Elam were in the thick of it through the night. Here's a sample of what they reported.
As that announcement came down, the grand jury's decision, and Michael Brown's mother was here as they moved her through the crowd, as she was so upset. The crowd then became very upset. They rushed the officers who were lined up in front of the Ferguson Police Department.
When the crowd started to try to overturn the car, they really began to fire a lot of tear gas. And that's what's been going on, is the streets have been cleared. A lot of us have been fired upon with tear gas.
The police are saying that this is unlawful assembly.
And we can smell it.
They're not allowed to be here. If not, they're dispersing it. And they're using the gas. Here come more canisters now. Here come flashbangs and canisters coming right up at us. We're going to have to move back here in a second. There's a big volley now of it. A couple of dozens. We don't know what that sound was. There was some gunfire before. They're throwing the canisters back from the crowd back towards the officers.
Where we are now, you can see that the gas is coming this way. Protesters have started coming here. There's a woman near us who has been injured, and again, people are being overcome with tear gas. And we are as well.
There's a whole line of stores down here. People were saying in the crowd, these are black-owned stores. Why are you doing this to black-owned businesses? At first, some members of the protest were trying to stop it. Protesters are coming down.
They're moving this woman, apparently. A woman in the crowd here has been
There's a woman in bad distress. They're bringing her down.
With something.
They're trying to get help from the police officers. The police officers are taking her. Tear gas.
Tear gas.
This tear gas just dropped right near us. It's going to get very bad here if we don't have masks.
Yeah, so
They're throwing it back. There are a lot of beanbags being shown at tear gas.
Standing outside the store in South Florissant, Beauty World, which somebody has broken into, and we've been watching people running in and out and stealing things. This gentleman here is trying to keep people out. There are a lot of calls from people walking by saying, "Why are you doing this? This is not what it's about." Similar to what Chris, I think, heard down at the strip mall down the street. But people were running in and out, and now I think there's a fire down the street. The police are still moving and pushing up South Florissant, telling people to disperse. As you can see, there's glass all over. the streets here. Here, watch out.
It is mayhem out here. We saw a good number of police officers leave the scene, take off in their cruisers. While right after they left, we watched a beauty wireless store just looted. I watched 20 people or so break in there, and then one young man threatened me for recording it. And right after that, then I saw two young women come over and say, this is our, she's an expletive. They were like, this is our stuff that you're doing this to. Why are you doing this? And so some of them stopped, and then everyone ran out the store. It's mayhem out here. And from where I'm standing, I don't see one police officer.
CNN's Stephanie Elam. This morning, Ferguson woke up to smoke still pouring from the smoldering ruins of 29 burned-out buildings. 14 people were hurt. 61 people were arrested, but only 9 were Ferguson residents. There were protests in Southern California after the verdict, too, mostly peaceful. One group of marchers took over the intersection of Wilshire and Rodeo in Beverly Hills for a time by lying down on the pavement. Another group marched downtown and gathered outside LAPD headquarters. 3 people were arrested there.
No justice, no peace!
That's the sound of some protesters who scrambled up an embankment and onto the Harbor Freeway near Pico Boulevard downtown. They blocked traffic in both directions for about an hour. LAPD and CHP officers fired non-lethal projectiles to disperse the crowd. The freeway was clear by about 2:30 a.m. In Oakland, 1,000 people turned out to protest the grand jury decision, but the march took an ugly turn when some demonstrators vandalized businesses and set fires in downtown Oakland. 39 people were arrested for assaulting police officers, burglary, and vandalism.
Hands up, don't shoot! Hands up, don't shoot!
Protesters in Chicago, nobody arrested there. But 5 people were arrested in Seattle last night when a protest there turned violent. There was some vandalism, and Interstate 5 was shut down for a while because protesters had walked onto the freeway to try to block traffic. Some in the crowd threw rocks and bottles at police, and somebody launched a large firework at a group of police officers. It exploded next to them, but nobody was hurt. A protest march in New York that made its way to Times Square was largely peaceful, though NYPD Commissioner and former LAPD Chief William Bratton was splashed with fake blood, and there was a loud protest outside the White House. Michael Hanline walked out of the Ventura County Jail yesterday and blinked in the bright sunshine. He looked a little lost. Not surprising. The last time Michael Hanline saw the outside world was in 1978. He was 32 then. He's 68 now. The 36 years he spent behind bars make him California's longest imprisoned, wrongly convicted inmate. He was arrested in 78 for the murder of an acquaintance. In 1980, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. In 1999, the California Innocence Project took on his case. It discovered that DNA at the crime scene was not Hanline's. Prosecutors knew that, but never disclosed that fact to Hanline's defense lawyers. The key prosecution witness was Hanline's then-girlfriend, who was also the victim's ex. Prosecutors did not tell Hanline's lawyers at trial they'd granted the girlfriend immunity, or that they had information that damaged her credibility. The girlfriend did admit she was on cocaine and PCP on the day of the murder, and also when she testified. In 2010, a federal judge ordered Hanline retried, but an appeals court overturned the order. Finally, last week, a Ventura County judge set aside Hanline's conviction.
Can't really express the feelings that I got inside me because it's just like a whirlwind. It's a whole new ball game. And I mean, it's an age of cell phones and technology and all that stuff's new. I'm a dinosaur.
Hanline is out, but he's not yet free. He has to wear an ankle bracelet, and he's due back in court in February. That's when prosecutors will say whether they want to retry him. The DA's office agrees that Hanline's first trial was a mess, but insists that's not the same as saying he's innocent. But the Innocence Project says all the evidence against Hanline has been discredited, and the DNA points to someone else, so it expects the case to be dropped. Then, Hanline will really be free. Now you know what we know. I'm Jeff Kaufman, High Definition News.